It's turned pretty cold again, funnily enough, but down here in the southeast of England, not frost cold, but still really cold. So I started some jobs today, and I did end up having to abandon my potting up jobs, which were for this video, because my hands were just getting too cold dealing with the damp soil. So, at this time of year, I just thought I'd do a quick roundup of what's going on. I mean, pretty much every day, what I'm doing is transplanting things on, potting things on, looking to harden things off, take some more cuttings from dahlias. I'm going to do that in a video tomorrow. I have done a dahlia cutting video, but I am going to be doing more cuttings tomorrow and potting up my tubers. So I plotted my tubers quite shallowly so that it was just more accessible for taking cuttings. But now, because I want to start hardening the dahlias off, which I'm going to start tomorrow, I have tested a few. I put 3 pots out just to see how they did, and they're fine. So, but these ones in more shallow trays, I'm going to pot up so that they've got a proper depth of soil around them, which will protect them if we continue to have these cooler temperatures. Because remember, they've been on the heated seat bed or next to the heated seat bed, or certainly in the greenhouse. So with these cooler temperatures, it's a bit of a shock. So I need to make sure they have a good duvet of soil around them in a nice pot. Some of them I may even plant out. We'll see after the hardening off. Maybe I need to, the ones that I've hardened off, I may plant out. Jobs generally I'm doing around now are obviously this planting out, sizing things up for moving, because I really want to now start getting tomatoes and things into the garden. These are some of the plants I'll be potting up today. I started them kind of as the winter sowing method, and they are desperate now to be potted up. And the other thing I do daily is I just wander around, and just like I did in that little extract there, I go around and see if anything needs watering. I don't water the whole garden every day. When we've had some balmy hot days, 2 or 3 in a row, and seedlings, of course, with very shallow roots, you will need to water them because that sort of surface level of soil will dry out quite quickly, which means the baby roots will also. Obviously, more mature plants can have access to deeper resources and reservoirs of water, so they don't need watering every day. So what I tend to do is I just tend to walk around the garden and give things a good soak that look like they need one. And then the next day, usually I can miss those and I'll water something else. So I probably spend about 20 to 30 minutes watering something at least in the garden or the greenhouse, don't forget. Anyhow, so then because it was cold today, I didn't get as much done as I wanted just because my hands and my toes were freezing. It was in the greenhouse at about 6 o'clock this evening, so not the warmest part of the day anyway. It was around 50 Fahrenheit, which is 10 degrees C, which is significantly lower. It's like half the temperature we've been enjoying the last previous week. So it was, when I was dealing with the wet compost, trying to pot everything up, my hands were freezing. Anyway, let's just get now to what I potted up today. I was going to put dahlias in this video, but as I say, I just ran out of time and just got too cold. I do like to wet my soil first because it's more like a glue when you're potting things up, and it doesn't sink down as easily when it's already wet. But of course, you don't have to have it wet. So I started off wetting it all, and then when I came to my final transplanting, I just couldn't handle how cold it was anymore. My hands were frozen. They were frostbitten, which is weird because it's like nearly May. So it seems crazy that I would be that cold. But it's the chill wind, and I seem to remember we had this cold wind persisting last year. I probably have it in a video somewhere. So that's certainly something to consider. It's good to get to know your particular microclimate, actually. Anyhow, so I started off watering the soil. As you know, I use compost and sand, sharp sand, just to give it a bit more drainage. And then the first thing I potted up was my flower burst Achillea fruit bowl. And this is a beautiful plant and it's perennial. So I actually really did try and save all these plants. Now, these germinated, I mean, literally every single one in, as you can see in this pot, which I started as the winter sowing method in the greenhouse, though I didn't have them outside. And they just absolutely went crazy. And then I didn't have time to put them out. So I had all these plants, and because they're perennial, so they could last a very long time and grow big, I just thought, you know what, I'm actually just going to take my time and try and save every single one of these plants. So this job took me the longest. And whilst that's kind of regrettable in some ways, I definitely am not going to sow them like this next year. In other ways, it was great because obviously it just shows that these plants are just, you know, so easy to germinate that I had almost every single one. I mean, it looks like every single one germinated. That's a hell of a lot of plants I'm going to have now going forward. And just another quick note before I move on to the next one, because it took me so long, you can see some of these, they were out of the pot such a long time with their roots exposed to the elements that they did start to wilt. So just another thing to bear in mind if you're going to sow these. It's not too late, by the way, to sow these now since they are perennial. They may not flower this year, but they will definitely flower next year. All right, the next one was the ox-eye daisy. The ox-eye daisy, yeah, that's right. So again, I overseeded these and they were in the pot far too long. Winter sowing, they germinated fantastically. I mean, some people regard them as a weed. Well, I don't know how people regard them as a weed, but you know, but I think it's just because they are very prolific in this country, in meadows and on sort of banks. You know, you see them like on a bank next to a church and things like that. I love them. So I'm going to grow them and I am going to start them here in the garden just because it's easier for me to do it this way. But I may end up transplanting a lot of them in my front garden. And hopefully they'll self-seed. And it's a cottage garden anyway, so it's totally informal. And I like the idea of having plants that will just self-seed and repeat every year, so that takes away a lot of the work from you, and you can just then, you know, concentrate on your more kind of, you know, showstopper plants. You can just spend a little more money on those or a bit more time and effort designing those elements of your garden, because the sort of the workhorse plants that, you know, like the forget-me-nots and these ox-eye daisies, hopefully perennials, any perennials that come back will just you know, do so much of the work for you every year that you don't have to keep concentrating on filling up all your borders from scratch every year. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, so I dotted these about, and because they were so thickly germinated, I did them in clumps like I did in a previous video. I did my gypsophilia because it grew, it was in the pot too long and it sort of, the roots had knitted together. So I ended up just planting those in chunks rather than trying to do separate plants. Of course, the strongest plants will survive regardless, so I'll just leave them to do their thing here. So that was the next one that I planted up. All right, and then the next one after that was the Chrysanthemum snowball. Now, these also germinated pretty well, but the reason, first of all, I was more careful when I dropped the seeds in here so that they weren't oversown. But the other reason there aren't so many is because for some reason, and I do this with certain plants, I think the more I want them, the more accident prone I am around them. But this is another one, like my white chard, which I was really looking forward to eating, but also knocked over. So I knocked these chrysanthemums over, and not only once, but twice. These are Chrysanthemum snowball. And these were, you know, despite being brutally treated, have actually done pretty well. And some of them were big enough to go in a bigger pot, and some of them just went into this smaller pot here. When I'm selecting a plot for transplanting, particularly with a plant I don't know much about, I will decide on the size of the pot kind of after I've opened them up, because sometimes, you know, they have really long roots. If it has grown a really long root, even inside the winter sowing bottle where the soil is shallow, then you know that they are that's their growing habit. So you might as well try and give them a a deeper pot. And if, for instance, you'll see when I did the scabious at the end, that they had quite very shallow roots, completely shallow roots. So you can obviously save a lot of compost and time if it's only a very compact rooted plant. So that's kind of how I just feel around it that way. I'm not an expert on, you know, the conditions or anything like that. But obviously, if I see the plant has a long root, then I'm going to give it a deeper pot than a plant I'm transplanting with a more shallow, compact root ball. This is the flax salmon bright eyes, also called linum. So I thought this would be a nice kind of filler plant. It's a little bit like phlox, as you can see. Again, another perennial. I think it's a perennial. Maybe I should check that. And I did do two sowings of this, and I don't know what happened, but I think it's probably another one I've knocked over, or the wind has blown over or something like that. As you can see, I sowed this on the 24th of January in here. So it's well due a good transplanting. And this is another one again that had a long root. So luckily, by my compost heap, I completely forgot that I had a ton of old pots that I used to have stored around there when I used to have my potting area around there, which I talk about in my previous video, and I never used it. And because I never used it, because it was on the drive and I didn't really like going out there, I completely forgot I had all these pots here. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to run out of pots. And then it was like, you know, for me, this is like finding an Aladdin's cave. A ton more pots in the corner, and I have some old grow bags as well. So I'm hoping to make use of those and grow some carrots or something later. Anyhow, this is the flax salmon bright eyes. So these all stayed outside. The only ones that went back in the greenhouse were the chrysanthemum snowballs, because they are a little bit more tender. Although I'm not expecting frost, they haven't been hardened off, so I put them straight back into the greenhouse after I potted them on, and I'll worry about hardening them off when the weather gets a bit warmer. Another thing I like to do when I'm labelling them, I do prefer wooden labels, but I'm all out and actually can't find them. So, but maybe I'll just order some on Amazon. But for now, I've got these old plastic ones that I had. And I like to put on the back the start date and the transplant date, just in case I haven't had chance to write them on my notes. I have like a seed box with all the sort of dates that I'm supposed to start them and everything. It's quite new, so I'm still not entirely on top of that schedule. But so what I do is I put it on the stick, so that when I get a chance to write it down, I've still got the information there on the actual plant itself. And I don't necessarily, by the way, label all of them. If I'm going to put them together on the plant stand or something like that, because the plants are so distinct by now, they have their true leaves. So I only need to really label one, and then I can recognise the others from that one. And then this was the final one that I sewed up, which was the scabious tall double, and it was very shallow rooted, and I only had a few germinate. They were from my own seeds actually, and I just germinated these in the greenhouse, and they're fine. I'll have enough anyway. And there we are. That was it. That's all I did today. And then tomorrow, the dahlias, I'm going to start hardening those off, because I really want to get my tomatoes, cucumbers, aubergines, chilies, everything. I just want to basically turn over my greenhouse now to my vegetables. So that was it. That's today's video. And by now you can see, look, I didn't water the compost on the table because my hands were absolutely freezing. And you know, as I'm editing this now, and it's several hours later, my toes are still like blocks of ice. They still not have thawed out. So that is how cold it was, which is utterly bizarre. But there you go, because it's been so balmy and I've had the chairs out and we've been sitting out in the garden. It's been like 70 degrees and then now it's absolutely feels like blocks of ice. But it is the wind. The wind is very chill. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you again in my next video. Bye.